Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, it's 2026, and maybe the most anticipated set of the year is here. This is the Ninjago Legacy Old Town. It's not really based off of anything in particular in the show. There is an old town in Ninjago that they explore, but it doesn't really look anything like this. But what this set does include, aside from an absolutely beautiful build by legendary LEGO Ninjago designer Lee Chi-wing, are minifigures of characters that we have wanted to get from Ninjago for years. I cannot believe that it's 2026 and we just now finally got a Dr. Julian Tinkerer minifigure. The Hands of Times are back, Dr. Saunders is making an appearance, we're getting Faith from Season 9, Harumi in her kabuki mask disguise. This is chock full of incredibly exciting Ninjago minifigures, both bringing back characters we already got in LEGO form but making them better, but also giving us characters that have been at the top of many people's wanted lists for years. It's easily my favorite set of the new wave, and for good reason. So let's jump into my look at the brand new Ninjago Old Town right now. This is set number 71861, The Old Town. It retails for $300 and comes with 4,851 pieces, which is pretty remarkable value, given that what you get is not only an absolutely beautiful display model for Ninjago, but also a fully modular one, allowing you to reconfigure it in a number of different setups, as well as including a ton of incredibly desirable minifigures. In fact, if you were to have made a list of the top most wanted Ninjago minifigures, whether variants of existing characters or characters we saw in the show but never appeared in physical form, most of the minifigures included in this set would probably be near the top of that list. And it is absolutely insane how a lot of the rallying calls for a Ninjago CMF have basically been answered by this one set. Add to the fact that because it's for the 15th anniversary, they included not one, not two, but 3 exclusive anniversary figures in the form of Young Woo, Young Garmadon, and the first Spinjitzu Master in this set, as well as the set including a reference to every single piece of Ninjago media ever. This is a true love letter to Ninjago fans, and to me is really the ultimate Ninjago set. Throughout the course of this review, we're going to be trying to break down this absolute monstrosity of a build in as many different segmented parts as we can, splitting up the minifigures throughout the build review in the areas of the set where they make the most sense to be reviewed in, and also taking a look at every single Easter egg, counting every Easter egg throughout the video, and showcasing the original piece of footage they came from alongside the Easter egg itself. This has been a ton of fun to edit, so let's now jump into the main build. To kick things off with the build here, we're actually going to start with a few of these smaller side builds that come in the first bag of the set. These include a shrine to the first Spinjitzu Master and a statue depicting him, similar to the one that we actually see in the TV show itself, specifically in Possession when we go to his tomb, a little workstation for Chuck the Carpenter, as well as a small food or tea cart over here. This very simple tea cart for Mistake is meant to give her a bit of a place in this set, especially because a lot of the minifigures include little builds that represent their characters, although this is definitely one of the smallest. It feels like it was made with mostly leftover budget included in the parts for the set, but honestly, even though this is basically the smallest standalone thing in the entire Old Town, you can already see the building techniques going into trying to just make this feel a bit more detailed than your standard little throwaway side build. You have some studs in the side techniques being used around the wheels to have that smoother texture going around, a nice little stand placed right here, and of course, the 2 prongs to allow Mistake to carry the cart on herself. There's a bit of an area for the teacups in there, as well as the teapot, and of course, the entire thing can close up if she's ready to close up shop for the day. It's a very simple and small build, but honestly, I really do like it. It adds a bit of charm to the Old Town itself and gives you something to place in the middle of the courtyard, especially because the build otherwise is relatively bare in terms of things that you can do inside the courtyard itself. I do like how you have these smaller things that you can kind of place around to make it feel a bit more lived in. Of course, since the T-cart belongs to Mistake, I figured we could also take a look at the minifigure itself. That's something I wanted to do about this review in particular. To keep it interesting between both the building and the figures, I've actually interspersed the looks of the figures throughout the review, based on where they make the most sense. Oftentimes throughout the entire Old Town build, there are sections of the build dedicated to celebrating one particular minifigure, like the Dragon Hunter stall right here for Faith, or even an area for Dr. Saunders in his museum curator form. So, as we go through the build, we'll be taking a look at the minifigures and comparing them to their legacy counterparts throughout the video, starting off with, of course, Mistake. Our first minifigure here is Mistake. Now this is not the first time we have gotten Mistake, but this is definitely the most accurate face print we've gotten. In fact, the face print is the only exclusive thing about the entire minifigure. The sweater comes from the new variant of Aunt May that we saw in the Spider-Man Sam Raimi movie sets, but honestly, it really closely matches the early design of the sweater that she wore in some of the first appearances she had throughout the Ninjago TV show. So I'm honestly very impressed that they were able to utilize that pre-existing part and still make it feel very quintessentially like Mistake. The very first minifigure of Mistake that we got was in 2018 for Ninjago City Docks, and they basically were utilizing a combination of pre-existing minifigure parts like the hair and the head, but they actually made a brand new torso for that character that 100% matches the design as seen in the TV show. Thankfully, because that torso already exists, you can basically make the perfect minifigure by taking the head from this one and placing it on top of the body from the previous one. It's a really solid minifigure design, and I'm really happy to get her in this set because we're also getting the Oni form of Mistake in the Build a Minifigure series at LEGO stores, so it's really cool to get both versions of the character in the entire wave of January 2026. The new head print is really good, and I'm really happy to finally get a Mistake without the large glasses that she never actually wore in the show, so this one is 100% faithful to her facial expressions, and I do like how it's very mysterious and stern at the same time, which really encapsulates the character. But now let's move on to the next part of the build. The next part of the build we're taking a look at here is another one of these side builds, and this is a little shack for Chuck the Carpenter, who's actually a returning character. Folks in the comments might be able to call it out before I do when I take a look at the minifigure, but for now, let's take a look at the build first. This is a little carpentry stall for Chuck, and you can see that Leah's managed to recolor his signature piece, this General Grievous canopy element, this time in dark green, acting as the roof for this particular build, which I think works really well. Again, even though this is a side build, there's some really nice building techniques being used here, such as the studs upside down techniques to actually mount these bars to have these studs in the side detailing for the side pillar frames. There's some really nice work being done for just adding on a bit of extra detail to the way it all comes together as well. Plus, we have our very first reference of the entire set, which is this little sticker depicting the rickshaw that the ninja used to pull Wu in the very early pilot episodes of Ninjago. Altogether, it's a nice little side build. I do kind of wish there was a way to make the roof stick on permanently and not just kind of be placed on top and fall off due to gravity, but honestly, given that this is just kind of a throwaway side build, it's nothing that I necessarily am bothered with too much. I feel like it is easily one of the simplest things in the entire set, despite still having a couple of clever building techniques, and it really is just a sign for much more interesting things to come. But let's take a quick look now at Chuck and compare him to his legacy minifigure counterpart. Chuck the Carpenter here is probably one of the least interesting minifigures to get in the entire set because he's one of the only ones that's comprised out of pre-existing minifigure parts that didn't even originate from Ninjago. However, the lore behind this character's name and profession is actually very, very cool, and there is an older Ninjago minifigure to compare him by, believe it or not. Obviously, he's utilizing the torso of the LEGO Ideas Blacksmith Shop Blacksmith, which works okay for his profession. The face is an existing LEGO City head that's been used a ton of times, and he's even using the standard spiky hairpiece that we've seen a lot of times before. But what makes this minifigure special is that this is actually one of the named characters. Cole names one of Sensei Yang's ghost students Chuck in Day of the Departed, and in Tommy Andreasen's semi-canon Way of the Departed online Twitter story, he actually says that Chuck went on to become a carpenter. So What's happened in this set is that basically he's been officially canonized or cemented in Ninjago set history as becoming a Carpenter after being reverted back to human form when Cole sent Yang's students through the rift in Day of the Departed. It is such a deep cut to actually get this character named this way, and what's even crazier is that the spiky hairpiece actually does match the human and ghost form of the character as seen in Day of the Departed for the animated short. It's really crazy how all of that came together into making this minifigure happen, literally out of existing LEGO City and Castle minifigure pieces, but it makes me appreciate an otherwise throwaway character so much more. Of course, I have to compare him next to the previous version of Yang's ghost student. This is kind of a silly comparison because obviously this minifigure is not meant to represent a newer version of the ghostly pupil, but it is kind of cool to put them side by side and imagine that they actually are exactly the same character. Now let's move on to the next section of the build. Our final side build of the set is actually pretty deceptive in the way it's put together because it actually acts as a very integral part of a rebuild of this set. As you can see, the entire Old Town is fully modular, and this is the cornerstone to how to convert it into a completely different layout, and we'll be taking a closer look at that in a second. For now though, let's appreciate the shrine of the first Spinjitzu Master, and I've brought alongside Wu and Garmadon because I felt like they really go along with the shrine. Not only do you have some amazing stickers representing the 4 golden weapons of Spinjitzu, the Scythe of Quakes, the Sword of Fire, the Shurikens of Ice, and the Nunchucks of Lightning, but you also have those weapons included in the actual set, which is really nice. It's also nice to know that LEGO does in fact know exactly what the Scythe of Quakes is supposed to look like, and yet still does not give us an accurate mold for it, but we'll talk about that a bit more when we take a look at the minifigures. The statue for the first Spinjitzu Master technically does not count as one of the minifigures in the set, but it is a full-on figure, utilizing the statue rope print from LEGO Lord of the Rings introduced for the Rivendell sets, which are really cool, and of course, he is seated with his kind of hands in a particular position to showcase the actual statue that appears in Season 5 in his tomb. You have these fires erupting on all different sides of the statue itself, but this entire piece is hiding a bit of a secret. You see, almost all 4 corners of this entire statue can be removed. The Scythe of Quakes part comes off as its own little 2x4 section, you have a larger area for the Sword of Fire as well as the Shuriken of Ice, and then you just have the Nunchucks of Lightning left. Of course, the statue itself can be removed, and now that begs the question, what are you supposed to do with this? Well, let's take a look with the Old Town. So here's the Old Town in this configuration, but there's another configuration you can use by utilizing the specialized rock element right here. So the first thing we're going to need to do is basically remove these back 2 rock pieces for this module. So as you can see here, the entire thing comes apart, and there's some Technic connectors right there. Then we separate out every single part of this build. Remove the front gate, this smaller lookout, and sadly, yes, that means that the actual zip line here is going to have to come off for now. You separate out the lookout tower, you take off the main towers, and then you separate out this smaller set of buildings here, all of which we are about to take a look at. You then also have to remove a couple of the other foliage elements and rock pieces included in the set. Namely, there's a couple of different rock pieces like this one right here that you take off, as well as this piece right here comes off as well. Okay, once you've done that, you then flip around the front gate, so you move this around like so. You take the statue piece, stick it onto the middle Technic hole there, and then this entire thing attaches up to this set of buildings right here, just kind of plugs in like so, doesn't fully connect or attach, but it just plugs in like that, and then you have the first beginning part of this gate. Then you take this element right here, which is for the Sword of Fire, you can see that detailed on the end there, and that actually just sticks right here, kind of covering up the exposed Technic axles. The next piece that you do is take this, stick it right here to cover up those exposed Technic pinholes, and then you have the first part of it done. But that's not all, because all of the rest of this still also connects. You see, the next thing to do is to kind of rotate this around like so. This entire area right here can slide in to this section of the wall like so, so that entire piece connects, and then you take this part, you connect this up right here, and yes, that means that you can still use the zip line. You can just reattach it. I guess technically you didn't need to really remove those 2 sections, but Again, this is just one of many different modular layouts you can do. And then finally, you can wrap it up by taking the last little golden weapon piece for the Shurikens of Ice, stick it on the end here, and then you cover up the final piece. Actually, you could do that, or you could even rotate this around in a different connection right here on the back if you really want to change things up and make this feel a lot more unique. So I think this is actually what you're supposed to do here, is to connect this piece up to the back element right here. It's going to be mounted at a very slight angle, like so. Still have your zip line, which you can factor into the build right here, just at a slightly different angle. Then you take this rock element, stick it right here to cover that up, and there you have a completely different layout for the old town that is a lot more horizontal in its display and something that will fit very nicely on a windowsill. Let's take a closer look at that right now. In this layout, the old town acts as a really nice wall, and again, this is something that classic LEGO castle sets did all the time to make the build seem even larger than they already are by arranging every single bit of them in a massive wall. I really do like how congruent this feels, even though it is a completely different modular layout of the entire set of buildings. Everything still flows really nicely. One of these center points here is utilizing the statue of the FSM as this 90-degree connection point, and it still works very well because you have the same roofing techniques being used on the top here, making it look like there's just a crack in the wall growing because of the tree growing on this side that's of course filled by the statue of the first Spinjitzu Master, who is surrounded by life and vegetation, which makes a lot of sense. Of course, you have the rest of the wall over here. We're going to take a much closer look at all these sections in a little bit, but I just really want to showcase how cool it is to combine these in a completely different layout. It is very rare to have a LEGO set this good that also is fully modular in itself, and that is something that is truly special about this set. But now let's take a look at every single individual component of the build, because we have a lot to cover when it comes to all the different Easter eggs of this entire incredible set. With that look at the alt build complete, I think it's time to take a look at the Sensei Wu and Garmadon Legacy minifigures. Kicking things off with Sensei Wu, we have a brand new version of Wu created for Ninjago Legacy. This one is actually one of the more common minifigures, appearing in 3 different sets. This one, the blacksmith shop, as well as the Ninjago minifigure display. But the design for the minifigure is absolutely amazing. I really love how they've updated the classic design for Wu, having the tunic actually be visible underneath the beard, the logo being a lot bolder and clearer, as well as really nice designs for sandals on the toes. The new headprint they introduced earlier last year for the Guardian Dragon version of Wu also looks absolutely fantastic, bringing the original design for Wu into modern sensibilities. And really the only thing missing here is the ponytail they introduced for Wu back in Season 11, which I thought was a really cool factor of his design, and I'm really sad that they decided not to include those in sets going forwards. However, pretty much everything else about the figure is absolutely fantastic, even the inclusion of the tan staff, which more accurately matches the color of his staff as seen in the show. Of course, we have to compare him next to the original version that came out in 2011, back when Ninjago first began. There are a lot of similarities here. The facial expressions are very, very similar, but they've changed up a few things. As I mentioned, the tunic was not visible for the sewing underneath the beard in the previous minifigure, so they've rectified that in this newer version to showcase a little bit more detail on the torso, but unfortunately, if you look at the back of these suits, for whatever reason they've actually simplified the symbol on the back of him for the newer design. I guess they figured that these smaller concentric circles were a little bit too complicated to print, and they decided to simplify it for the modern figure, but it's a bit too bad because it's one of the very few times we've actually lost a little bit of detail going from the original onto the Legacy version. You can see those little inner circles inside the main ring of his logo have hollow centers on the original minifigure, but on this one they are completely filled in. So that is really the only lost detail, but otherwise, everything else about the figure is just so much better, it's hard to complain. One of the more exciting minifigures to be included in this set though is Lord Garmadon, and most of that is because of the brand new headprint. In fact, Garmadon has the exact same torso as his previous Legacy iteration, and the legs this time around are unprinted as opposed to the previous Legacy version, which actually did have printed legs. So honestly, Almost everything about this minifigure is a bit of a downgrade other than the head, which is absolutely fantastic and honestly totally redeems the figure to me. The facial expressions used for the head are modeled after Garmadon's appearances in the Oni trilogy, one with a very sinister grin that isn't too goofy like it was in the LEGO Ninjago movie version, and on the other side of the head he has a very serious frown, which 100% matches up with the facial expressions that you would see him have throughout the Oni trilogy, especially when he became Emperor Garmadon of Ninjago City. I am very pleased with this dual-sided head. It really gives me everything I was missing when it comes to a fully accurate Garmadon minifigure, because as of late, I was very disappointed to see them either use the Legacy head, which honestly isn't very accurate to the TV show, or the head from the LEGO Ninjago movie, which feels a little bit too exaggerated and silly. This is the absolute perfect expression to give Garmadon for the TV show. He looks very serious with his expression, and I cannot wait to give this to some of the other Garmadon minifigures that we saw throughout the Oni trilogy, like the Resurrected Garmadon would look absolutely fantastic with either of these two designs. Of course, comparing him next to the original version of Garmadon with the two arms, you can see how the minifigure design has changed a little bit over the years. Obviously, that one also did not have printing on the legs, so I guess this one actually is a pretty accurate Legacy version, even though the helmet is the newer style of 2012 helmet they introduced, because the older samurai helmet is no longer in production. The nice thing about this new figure, though, is that the helmet he's using compared to the original Legacy version that came out a few years ago is the correct shade of gunmetal gray, which you see in Zayn's vision of the Green Ninja in Season 1, making this pretty accurate to that original two-armed version of Garmadon as opposed to the one that came out for Legacy, which used a black helmet. Well, we're quite a few minutes in, and now it's time to finally get to the main structure of the old town itself. As I just showcased with that special statue block, the entire thing is modular. Everything comes apart in different sections, and I'll demonstrate that one more time. You first have the gate, which is built as its own separate piece. This entire thing comes off. Then you have the next section here that predominantly focuses on the postman's workshop as well as Faith's hideout, plus a lot of Easter eggs on the wall here. You then have your next section, and you actually have to detach the zip line for this one, but it is a bit of a lookout area with half of this nature area built into it, and then you finally have the largest tower and the final thing that you build. Of course, we're going to start in the order in which you build things with the gate here. So here is your front gate to the old town, and as such, it actually doesn't have that many different unique references as compared to all of the other sections, but really just acts as an entry portal with some really nice architectural design built in to welcome you into the main build. I'm going to start off by taking a look at the front gate in particular. One of the really great things that is done here is that this is one of the most sturdy parts of the build. Despite the fact that it is an entryway, there are actually Technic beams running through both of these pillars that are held in by Technic axles that are attached to these tiles with stickers on them, so the entire thing is incredibly sturdy and certainly will stay together, even when being transported through a train, which is exactly what I had to do when building this. Of course, if you look at the archway here, you have some really great new piece design in the form of this studs in the side building technique, recoloring this element in the sand green color to really have that nice curvature over the grate itself. Of course, you have some really nice intricate studs in the side detailing in there with just a few small detail elements that really just add a lot of texture to the opening gate, something I can really appreciate. You've got some really good details in here as well with the different little intermixed red tiles in there to make it look like those are actually structurally supporting the entire bridge itself. And then of course you get to the top part of the roof, which is mainly relying on the pagoda tile pieces that were introduced for LEGO Monkey Kid, but they actually work really well for this set, and many of the different roof elements in this set actually use these pieces. Black frogs are used to tip off the ends of these to really make the pagoda kind of curl up at a certain point, which I really appreciate. I think that's a very good parts usage and a good detail, and you even have the mech fingers being used as the top of the crest here. Of course, going on to the side of the build, one thing I really appreciate about every single bit and piece of the old town is that there's little studs in the side rockwork detailing across the entire building. You have a bit of olive green mixed in here to suggest moss or grass growing on the side of the rocks. You have the pink flowers growing on them as well, and the entire pattern continues alongside the entire build. It's something that's actually pretty consistent with one of Lee's other designs, the blacksmith shop, which also was raised up on this rockwork base, which just makes it feel a lot more premium as a LEGO building experience, especially with this level of detail carrying throughout the entire build, even around the back, which normally most LEGO designers would not bother to do. One of my favorite details here is that there is a tree growing through the wall here, where you can see that this entire thing is actually built with a couple of cracks in the wall purposefully built in to make it look like the tree has kind of grown through a crack in the wall, which is super cool. Of course, it is very structurally sound and literally is just there for looks, but I can really appreciate the amount of detail that went into crafting this. Just little details like being able to see some light through the cracks here genuinely impress me with how this model is built. Of course, you can go around the entire tree and see how it kind of curves around the wall itself. I like how you have a couple of different colors of leaves here as well, suggesting a different foliage, with this side being predominantly yellow, and then you have the classic pink trees being used at the front entryway here, which is very reminiscent to the original LEGO monastery and the way the monastery Spinjitzu has been depicted in the animation. One other thing I do want to note before we turn this entire thing around is that you have a really nice sloping detail for the roof. It's a very simple technique where obviously everything is just placed just one plate above each other, but it adds a lot of great detail to the entire build and is something I really appreciate about the way that this is all constructed. Of course, as we rotate the build around here, we can take a look at the interior, and there's a couple of Easter eggs here. This section is relatively light on the quantity of Easter eggs, but the ones factored in are some of my favorites. First off, we have a sticker recreation of the Zayn poster as seen in Tournament of Elements back in Season 4 of Ninjago. This was on the main promo artwork, kind of luring the ninja to Chen's Island, and it's very, very cool to see this as an official sticker piece. Very happy to see this finally be made into an actual LEGO element, and of course, that is all thanks to Lee, who was able to factor in a reference from literally every single Ninjago season or piece of media into this set. Of course, going on to over here, you have some of the designs that we saw just last year for the Tournament of the Sources, another tournament-themed reference, but of course this is for the Sources tournament. You have these spikes on the back of the dragon representing the dragon Spinjitzu crowns, which we actually see a very similar sticker being used in some of those Spinjitzu sets, namely the Aaron versus Raz Spinjitzu battle set, and then the shuriken in the center here is a reference to the symbols that we saw throughout Season 11 sets, which actually had this exact ninja star symbol. But my favorite references lie in here. Lifting open this part of the roof reveals the coveted Prime Empire motherboard, which was what the ninja were fighting the mechanic over during the opening to Season 12, Prime Empire, and it's so cool to get this as an actual piece for a sticker in this set. But what's even more exciting to a lot of the die-hard Ninjago fans is this element right here. This is the scroll of the Green Ninja, the very first thing that the ninja find to actually discover the prophecy of the Green Ninja back in Season 1 Rise of the Serpentine, depicting Kai, Jay, Zayn, and Cole, all positioning around Lloyd the Green Ninja, although of course at the time, they didn't know it was Lloyd and they thought it could be maybe one of them. This is a really timely piece to include, especially as Season 4 of Dragon's Rising is set to focus a lot more on the origin and source of Lloyd's powers, so I am so pleased to get this as an actual sticker in the set. It is easily maybe one of my favorite references in any LEGO set ever. I think this might be my favorite reference in the set. It's depicted so nicely as an actual LEGO piece, the graphic design is really cool, and it's literally just tucked away in there. I almost kind of wish that there was a more prominent position for that particular scroll in the set, because I feel like it's honestly maybe the most important Easter egg here, and it's literally just tucked away so that unless you're watching this or someone else's review, the only way to know it's there is by building the set yourself. Of course, I also do want to talk about the build composition of this side of the gate as well. You have the tree snaking across on this side with some great studs in these side techniques, showcasing the tree growing through the cracks with a flower there, a frog, some of the transparent slope elements they introduced for LEGO Friends a couple of years back, and then you get to the sides of the inner part of the gate. And one thing I really like here is that it really implies that there's different layers to the gate. There is a red inner layer, and then you have this kind of stone overlaid around it. And of course, all of this is hiding the two different Technic beams that are running through both sides of the pillars here, which are very, very impressive in how structurally sound it's able to be kept, but how well integrated and hidden it is. If I didn't tell you there were Technic beams going through here, you probably would not know. And that's something I really appreciate about how sturdy this is despite being an entry portal. Of course, the detailing continues alongside the rest of the build. There's some amazing rock work being done here for the cobblestone pathways, just different pieces making it feel a bit asymmetrical, and the entire build here is mounted at an angle, which is very, very impressive. You can see the hinges being used, but it's also anchored by a couple of studs underneath the plates here to really make sure that this is very rigid and fully built in, utilizing the best LEGO geometry possible. But with that though, I think it's time to move away from the front entrance gate and take a look at the next section that you put together. Before we move on from the front gate though, I do want to focus in on some of the new Legacy Ninja included in this set, because these are some of the very first minifigures you put together who really greet you as you enter Old Town. We'll take a look at the rest of the Ninja on some of the other areas that suit them better throughout the set, but for now let's start off with Kai, Cole, Jay, and Lloyd. The first Ninja we're going to take a look at in this set, of course, has to be Kai. This is a remake of his ZX suit from 2012, but for whatever reason they decided to include the hairpiece in this set instead of the new dual molded hood, which appears in all of the other Ninjago Legacy sets for 2026. Unfortunately, unlike some other Ninjago sets which give us both the hair and the hood, this set only gave us the hair, and I imagine that a lot of that boiled down to budget reasons, including just one more dual molded component in the set, but also, I can see why Lee decided to use the hair for this particular set, because this is more of a casual town vibe as opposed to the more action-oriented Legacy sets that we're getting for some of the other sets this wave. The only new components here are the torso and legs, since Kai's standard face from the movie is still in production, and I really like how they've beefed up a lot of the detail here. The gold feels a lot more defined on this suit compared to the original, which just had a very, very light line for the gold feathers on the torso for the breastplate there. Here it is very clearly defined and detailed, which I think looks really good. I also love how there's a very minor gold stripe going down the side of the dark gray robe, which really just adds a little bit of glow and color to it for the metallic reflectivity of the torso, and the new toe print is really cool as well. If I were to complain about only one minor thing, it's that unfortunately, the ninja symbols don't really seem to match up whatsoever this wave with the circular ZX armor. One really cool thing the original ZX suits did in 2012 was frame up all of the ninja symbols in the center of the armor piece, but for this wave, only some of the ninja suits and not all of them do it, and for Kai's in particular, you can see it's just printed a lot lower than the circle itself. That, of course, was to accommodate a slightly more detailed printing for the back armor elements, which I think is cool to get, but honestly, I think it would have been even more special to still have that more detailed printing and make the symbol line up, because I remember, at least when I was a kid, that was a really cool part of the ZX armor, was being able to see the symbols centered in the middle of the logo in the back of the chest, which unfortunately is a detail that isn't really present here. Of course, comparing him next to the original ZX version of Kai, you can see that there's a lot of major improvements. One thing that LEGO has done is removed any printing that suggests weaponry printed onto the torsos of the characters. This is actually something that they learned back in Season 4 Tournament of Elements, when the ninja had to remove their weapons when entering a prison, but their outfits still clearly had weapons printed on them. So LEGO has kind of solved that writing problem by not printing any actual weapons on ninja torsos anymore, and just having the plain outfits. I think it's a nice enough change, and honestly, it was always a little bit hokey to see the weapons printed on that we knew the ninja could never actually use or interact with, so I'm a much bigger fan of the way they do it nowadays, and altogether, despite the fact that the symbol is misaligned and that is my biggest complaint about the suit, I think everything else about it is a major improvement, and I'm very pleased with this figure. Next up in the Ninja minifig lineup here is Jay, and they've done something really special for Jay for this particular figure. What they've done is they've brick built the glider suit that he wears in the very first pilot of the show, and then revisited in a flashback in Season 9 Hunted, but it's really awesome finally getting this as an actual brick built LEGO component. Obviously, there's nothing super special with the pieces used, it's just standard LEGO bricks being used, but I really like the amount of effort that went into depicting one of the very first times we ever saw Jay on screen. To go alongside the wings, they actually also gave him the aviator's cap with goggles that he does feature in the early season of the show when we saw him testing out this wingsuit in Ninjago City when he was telling his story about how he met Sensei Wu, and that is a super nice addition because unlike some of the other ninja we're going to take a look at, they also managed to include the dual molded ninja hood for this character, even though I would argue that this is maybe the one ninja in the set that didn't also need the hood attached as well, because he already has the perfect headgear for his back accessory. This one of course does not have the golden ZX armor introduced with it because he has the wingsuit on instead, but honestly I think it was a good enough compromise because the golden ZX armor is a pretty common piece anyway. Of course, Jay is one of the more controversial minifigures to be redesigned for 2026. People are not a fan of the integration of gold into his color scheme, and despite the fact that that was not actually done for budgetary reasons, it was a creative decision to introduce gold to celebrate the legacy anniversary of Ninjago in 2026 into all of the rebuilt ZX suits. It is something that affects Jay the most negatively because he had a very predominantly silver outfit. Now, some LEGO designers actually internally did consider changing the color of the arm and armor piece fully to gold, which I'm pretty happy they did not do because I feel like the silver arm is a very iconic part of the suit, but unfortunately it does mean that when you do have the gold factored into the hood, as well as the armor, which isn't present on this figure because of the wingsuit, but is present on the other iterations of him, it does feel a little bit strange having that mishmash of metallic colors. I do like how they did make an attempt to make it blend a little bit by having some gold traces and outline detail be factored into the silver armor. They did their best to try and make it make a little bit of sense, but honestly, I just feel like they should have just gone with the original silver here, anniversary or not, especially for this character. I feel like it is a very iconic part of the suit. But you know, LEGO did want to put in gold to celebrate the anniversary. I can see how that could have made sense for the LEGO designers at the time, so it is definitely a bit of a trade-off. But, of course, when you compare it next to the original, I do think that everything else about the minifigure suit printing is very good. One of my favorite subtle details about this minifigure are the lightning stripes on the belt. I feel like those are a really cool detail that feel almost randomly scattered, like they're bursts of electricity rippling around his robes, and it's just an extra added layer of detail that we absolutely would not have gotten back in 2012, but now, in 2026, a ton of years later, they actually have the ability to do that level of printing, so I'm very happy with most of the design other than the use of gold for the hood and the armor, which isn't even present in this set anyway, so honestly, he looks the best with this set because if you have him in the wingsuit form with the helmet, you don't even need to see any gold at all, and I think that is the best look for this suit. Next in the lineup here is Cole, and for the Old Town, they decided to give Cole hair instead of his hood, which is not included in this set, although it's less of a big deal than, say, some of the other ninja hoods not being included, because you can get Cole fully armored up with his hood in the car polybag, if you're actually able to find it. I was not. Moving on to the figure though, this is actually one of the changes from silver to gold that I honestly don't mind that much. I know I just spent a ton of time harping on how I did not like the change to gold for Jay, but that's because there was already so much silver factored into Jay's torso. For Cole, there was a lot less silver factored in fact there was basically no silver, so they were actually able to make it make a lot more sense with the gold armor and helmet being used here. In fact, one thing that they've done that is really cool about the printing is that compared to the original, they've added some very subtle gold flakes into the gunmetal gray armor printing that he has around his breastplate there, so it really makes it feel a lot more congruent with the gold factored into the entire suit here. They also managed to line up the elemental symbol on the back for the newer figure as well, which is very nice to see, and I love the inclusion of some of the gold buckles added into the straps on the legs, which are just feeling a little bit more nicely detailed compared to the original ZX version, which did actually have a few gold buckles, but just a lot smaller than here. Of course, one of the major improvements they've made to all of the different ZX suits are the inclusion of the sandals, which I think add a lot of great detail and printing to the feet themselves, and they've also cleaned up the undershirt underneath, whereas on the original figure they basically just had these dark gray lines just in single creases going alongside the torso, and it was kind of hard to parse what the actual undershirt looked like underneath the armor. This minifigure does a much better job at cleaning up the graphic design there. It really looks like he's wearing some sort of a ninja kimono underneath the gunmetal gray and gold scales, and I feel like that little detail just adds a lot more to the minifigure itself to make the outfit make a lot more sense in the quote-unquote real world of what these minifigures would be wearing. The only major downgrade here is the Scythe of Quakes. I do not know what LEGO was cooking with this Scythe of Quakes. I actually think it is probably the worst build for the Scythe of Quakes we've gotten ever, and that is saying a lot because we've gotten like 5 of these things and none of them have been particularly good, but this one just doesn't really resemble the Scythe at all. The Dragon Hilt, I guess, kind of resembles the Legacy remade version for the reforged one in March of the Oni, but then you go to the top of the Scythe and it looks really bizarre. The build here honestly just feels like kind of an excuse to use the gold spike piece in as many sets as possible because they actually had to bring that piece back from being retired, which certainly cost a decent amount of budget to make that piece in gold because we haven't seen it in gold in quite a few years. Lee had to do that for the blacksmith shop to give Nia her original spinner weapons, which is something I very much respect and appreciate. It's very cool he did that, but now it feels like they were just trying to force that piece into the Scythe of Quakes where it doesn't really make sense, and honestly, I feel like the original build just worked a lot better, even though that one was far from perfect as well. One of these days we're gonna get a perfect Scythe of Quakes mold. We came so close with the crystallized weapons, and yet, so far, because the shaft was way too short and it didn't even match the actual design for the patterning. Maybe one of these days we'll get an actual accurate mold, but until then, this is a pretty decent Cole minifigure, Scythe aside. And finally, the last minifig I want to take a look at for the entryway portal before we move on to the rest of the set is Lloyd. Lloyd here is in his fully detailed green ninja outfit. It's kind of funny because out of all the ninja in the set, this is probably the one that I totally would have been fine with not getting the hood for and instead just getting the hair, because you can walk into any LEGO store and pick up the hood and the young Lloyd build minifigure tower right now, but it is nice to get the fully suited up version of Lloyd in his green ninja outfit here. And who am I kidding? I honestly feel like there's no way they would not have included the fully armored up or outfitted version of Lloyd in a set like this. The minifigure obviously has swapped the gunmetal gray color of the original armor to gold, but again, because it's Lloyd, I actually think it works very, very well here. They have ever so slightly changed the printing for the torso itself to have the gold scale highlights instead of the gunmetal gray, and I feel like that does a lot in terms of making me like the gold armor and crown a lot more for this figure. Of course, I haven't really talked about the new hood elements, but the new hood pieces are very cool. Getting dual molded components for the ninja hoods is a real treat, especially as a clean upgrade compared to the original ZX suits, which oftentimes had the printing kinda rub off on the metallic crown. The only downside, and I'm not sure if this is just a problem with my sets or if other people notice this too, but for whatever reason, all of my new ninja hoods sit a little bit too low on their faces, to the point where the ninja eyebrows, aka one of the most recognizable parts of their characteristics, are almost completely covered. I've actually had to swap out the heads for a lot of these characters to match ones that had my faces printed a little bit lower, and these are very, very minute details in the manufacturing of LEGO pieces, but it's never an issue that I ever had with any of the original ZX hoods, and I feel like the design of the mold actually makes it sit a little bit too far down on the ninja heads, where the actual eye slit is mounted a bit too far low. It's a bit unfortunate because otherwise, I love this hood design. I think it's a really cool and clever dual molded piece, but unfortunately, I've noticed it in all of my legacy sets so far in that the ninja face prints are either printed a little bit too high or the hood design is mounted a little bit too low. I wish this was something that was caught during element testing because it feels like a problem that persists throughout all of these different legacy hoods, and there isn't really an easy solution to it because as soon as you try to make the hoods just sit a little bit higher on the heads, you weaken the connection to the stud on the top of the head. I don't know if everybody is noticing this issue or it's just me, so let me know in the comments if you've bought these sets, if you have found that same issue. I've tried to rectify it as best I can by literally trying out the hoods on all of my different Ninjago minifigures until I found a headpiece that actually has the face printed low enough so you can see the eyebrows, but if the sets brand new out of the box are having this issue, that's definitely something I did want to note. Otherwise though, I do really like this suit. The return of Lloyd's original symbol is very nice, and while it is a little bit too large for the Ninja ZX ring, I do like how you can see most of it in the ring, and it's okay to me that the tail is kind of snaking off at the bottom because obviously it is a very large symbol compared to the other ninja animal symbols, so it makes sense that they would slightly enlarge it for this particular ninja suit. Altogether, great minifigure to get. It is impossible to foresee a set like this without having all of the ninja included, and well, all 6 of the original ninja are. So that about sums up our look at the entryway, and let's take a look at the rest of the set. Here's the next section that you put together, and it is the second largest section of the entire Old Town in terms of building depth. For the figures, we'll take a look at Faith, the administration agent, and the postman, because Faith and the postman both have builds that directly relate to them in this section, and the administration agent is one of the only minifigures in the set that doesn't necessarily have one particular build associated with them, but there's a lot of Dragon's Rising references in this particular area of the build, so I figured it makes sense to put that one here. But first though, let's take a look at the build itself. There's a lot to cover here, but I'm actually going to spin it around and take a look at the building techniques from the outside first, starting off with this area. First off, we have our continuation of the Old Town wall, another tree growing alongside this side of the wall here, which looks really amazing. This one is even more detailed than the one in the front, and I really love a lot of the building techniques being used here, from the different colors of the wood bark to the different orientations of builds to even the petals just kind of sticking out of different sides of the trees. It really makes it look like it's in the process of growing, which is very, very nice. Of course, this is utilizing that yellow color, which is a really great one to get for the foliage here. Very, very happy with the overall design here, and of course you also have the roofing techniques continuing on the top, but you do have some petals that have fallen from the tree onto the roof. Just love the little details like that. Over here, there is a small shrine, and this isn't necessarily a reference to one particular thing from Ninjago, but it actually acts as a bit of a hidden switch. Pushing in the figure here allows the wall to burst and causing a secret entrance to open into the side of the Old Town. On this wall, of course, is a reference to Dragon's Rising Season 3, which showcases the wanted poster for Kai, Nia, and Wildfire after they are being wanted by the Lightning Tides for interrupting their ceremonies. I think it's very funny they made that into an actual sticker, and cool to see something so recently shown in the TV show actually get an appearance in this set, because again, Lee made sure to include a reference from every single season in this particular build. Of course, going on to the top here, you have some great studs on the side detailing, utilizing the red ingots for the wall design. You have a shrine on the top there, and then you have this larger area that actually swings open to reveal the interior of this building, which we'll take a look at in a second. For now though, I want to really appreciate our first look at some of the larger buildings in this set. There's no building that is purely rectangular or symmetrical. Everything feels a little asymmetrical, but is designed with a lot of intentionality, because it all fits together like a series of different puzzle pieces, which is something I really appreciate. You can see the building here is meant to be the postman's office, and there's different colors of the wood here, maybe meant to suggest that this is an older building. The wood is maybe decaying in some areas, or it's just kind of thrown together. It's overgrown by some of these olive green leaves, which suggests that these are older leaves or vines that are creeping up the side of the building, and yet you still do have that working AC unit as well, plus the really nice tiles used for the ingots on the roof here. Going on to this other side, there's some great studs in the side techniques used for the rockwork to support the other building that again is mounted at a completely different angle. The amounts of different LEGO geometries at play here is honestly astounding, and it's very, very cool seeing everything come together. And that brings you to Faith's Dragon Hunter hunt here, the nest area where Faith is situated. Lee mentioned that he really wanted to include Faith in the set, so he made sure to literally build this into the set to make sure that she had to be included no matter how many different times the minifigure lineup changed, and it actually changed 15 times. So he was very happy he actually put this in as part of the build very early on, so we could keep Faith as a minifigure. I'm going to now rotate this around so we can start taking a look at the interior before we actually go into any of the separate buildings. First off, on the other side of the wall here, there is another Dragon's Rising reference. This one is for Dragon's Rising Season 2. It is depicting Bonzel's puppet show as she was showcasing the legend of Gandalaria and the Forbidden Five, and how Egalt and Rontu, the force from the east, basically fought off the Forbidden Five and sent them into nether space. Very cool to see that artwork from the very stylized retelling of the story from Dragon's Rising Season 2 be depicted in a sticker, and it's instantly recognizable what that is supposed to be. Of course, going alongside here, you have a set of very simple stairs that are pretty much just utilizing the standard LEGO stair element, but I do like how that kind of continues onto the bottom steps for the ground here, continuing that exact style, going upwards to the upper area. You've got the continuation of the wall, and then of course a bit of rock work as well, just laid out for the ground here. Over here, though, is one of my favorite stickers in the entire set because this references a ton of different things in Ninjago's history. First off, you have the Woo Crew symbol, which was part of the promotional campaign LEGO was doing in 2016 and 2017 throughout Skybound and Day of the Departed to join the Woo Crew. You have the Sons of Garmadon logo from 2018 crossed out and replaced with the symbol of the Red Crows, which, if you haven't read the Garmadon comic series, the Red Crows was a villainous force led by Mogra comprised of former Sons of Garmadon members who changed their allegiance to Mogra and tried to actually usurp Garmadon at the Two Moon Village, a reference we'll actually see later on in this set. Going on to over here, we have the Sky Pirates emblem from Ninjago Skybound Season 6, just a great one to see factored in there. Our final TV show reference on this wall is the ninja hand symbols as placed onto the Monastery of Spinjitzu mural, and then we actually have another of my favorite set of references in the set because you have two different villains from the Spinjitzu Brothers series, which is so cool to see them actually factor that in. Specifically, the two characters included here are Tanabrax, the puppet master from the Lair of Tanabrax book, as well as Mindaro, the magical painter from the Chroma's Clutches book. Very cool to see even the Ninjago books being referenced here, and it just shows the extra level of love and attention that went into making this a true celebration of Ninjago's history. Of course, the main build here is an office for the postman. You have a mailbox that is inset into the tree, and one thing I love about it is that you can see the roots of the tree kind of growing around the mailbox. I think that is such a cool design there to actually have it be inset into the build of the rockwork here. And of course, you do have the postman logo right there, as well as the postman sign and the door leading you into his space. But let's take a closer look at said space right now because, again, the entire back will swing open, and there's a lot of other really cool references hidden inside here. There's a water cooler brick built inside there, as well as a place to write a letter. Perhaps that could even be the letter that Wu sent to Misako but was intercepted by Garmadon. And of course, inside here you have a couple of the other Ninjago trading cards that they've kind of included as a collectible miniature line within a number of different sets. This one right here is for the Skulkin Cruncha, and it is really cool, depicting a one-to-one recreation of the original 2011 Spinner trading card. And then you have another one coming up very shortly, but before that, we also have a pretty cool multi-theme reference here. Obviously, it is meant to depict Digikai and Unagami from Season 12 Prime Empire, but the logo of Playbox actually originated from the Gamer collectible minifigure series, which was specifically the Gamer minifigure from one of the series that actually showcased him having this Playbox being a brand in the LEGO world that's kind of their equivalent of PlayStation. So it implies that this is Prime Empire making its way onto consoles, which is really cool, and also maybe somebody lucky is getting this in the mail if the postman is sending it out. So moving on from that, we also have one of the other final trading cards included here, which is the Knuckle trading card. Very cool to get both Cruncha and Knuckle as trading cards in the set, and this one is depicting the original card that we got, again, for the 2011 pilots. So super cool to see that factored in as just a little tucked away reference in here, as well as a couple of other small little references and builds. I really like the register that the postman has set up here, just utilizing a couple of smaller builds to really replicate some of the tools that he might be using, as well as the post office area stuffed full of mail right there. Closing up this section though, and ending our look at the first fully enclosed building, we can take a look at the Dragon Hunter's workshop here. This is specifically meant for Faith, and you have a fully movable and workable crane that actually can be raised and lowered with a barrel here. Pretty cool, very simple function that we've seen in a ton of other LEGO sets before, but I think it adds a nice level of interactability to the set. Of course, you do have the original Dragon Hunter's logo factored into the side of the build here as a sticker with their trademark silver spikes integrated in as well, which is very nice to see, a nod to a really great season of Ninjago. And you even have some vehicle engine parts hinting at Faith actually working as a mechanic on some of the Dragon Hunter vehicles, which we see throughout Season 9. I really do like how this kind of feels transplanted out of the Dragon Hunter season. The architecture is very different. You have metallic silver and dark gray being used, silver ingots being used for the balcony right here, an engine factored onto the floor, silver spikes sticking out of the side. It just feels very different compared to the rest of the builds in the set and is unmistakably meant to be part of the Dragon Hunter arsenal. But now, speaking of the Dragon Hunters, let's take a look at Faith, finally made into full-on minifigure form accurate to the TV show, as well as the other characters we'll take a look at in this section right now. Of course, we have to start off by taking a look at Faith. Faith is one of the most anticipated minifigures that they released in this set, and for good reason. Faith was a major character who appeared throughout Season 9 of Ninjago, Hunted, and while we did get 2 different minifigures of Faith in her heavy metal persona for Ninjago, one throughout the sets and one that kind of replicated her hairstyle in the show through a magazine, we never actually got a show-accurate version of Faith without all of the heavy metal disguise on until now. And I can't believe it has taken this long. In fact, it's taken them so long that obviously the original torso and legs for Faith are out of production, and they had to spend the budget to make a brand new set of torso and legs with a new graphic design that is very, very close, but not exactly a match to the original design as seen for her torso as heavy metal in 2018. This is a phenomenal minifigure, and obviously the facial expressions are the #1 best thing about the figure. I really love how interesting and how accurate the 2 different facial expressions are. One very angry, showcasing her rage, and one smiling and happy, which was a side of Faith that sometimes we did get to see throughout the show. Both of those expressions really nicely sum up the character, and obviously she has the exact correct hairpiece that she's supposed to have, as opposed to the one that we got in a magazine, which was very perplexing because they gave us a hairpiece for Faith, but not the correct one that you could actually see in the show, which is especially strange because they had already produced the black wig in this color then, but potentially it wasn't in production at the time, or maybe it just cost extra budget. I really don't know. But technically, as you can see when you compare it next to the 2 other versions of heavy metal, this is by far the most show-accurate version. I think the thing that is most interesting to me about this minifigure is just how close the torso is compared to the original. It's almost a 1-to-1 match. There's only just a couple of small details changed. The hips are not orange, instead they are colored black this time. The hook on the legs is a little bit smaller. The chain detailing is cleaned up a little bit, but honestly, aside from that, it is almost a 1-to-1 recreation of the original torso used for heavy metal, which is super interesting because it's very rare for LEGO to just put out an almost 1-to-1 remake of a minifigure like this, but I guess since obviously those parts are long out of production, they just decided to bring it back as close as possible. The only thing that I feel like is a little bit odd here is that honestly, I probably would have been fine if they just gave Faith plain black legs. I know this is gonna sound very weird because I am suggesting they remove detail from this figure, but given how close this minifigure is to an existing minifigure we already got from Ninjago, I would have much rather we had had that leg printing budget go to a character like, say, Dr. Julian, who had leg printing in the show but doesn't have leg printing in the set. And yeah, you can swap out some pre-existing parts for that, and we'll talk about that more when we take a look at him later on in this video. But maybe because that was a last-minute addition to the lineup, they didn't have time to give him printed legs and remove the ones already designed for Faith. I don't really know what the deal was there, but if there was one way that it could have been budget optimized, I would have taken away the printing for the legs here, because we could have just given her leg printing from the original figure and given it to Dr. Julian. But I'm sure it had to do with timelines more than anything. Other than that, this is a phenomenal minifigure. It's basically 1-to-1 perfect for what we see in the show, so there's literally nothing I can complain about here. This next minifig here should be a pretty quick one because it's the administration agent from Dragon's Rising, and it's one of the only other minifigures in the set that doesn't include any brand new pieces made specifically for Ninjago. However, the torso and head really fit the character very well, and I'm very impressed at how close this is to the look and feel of the administration agents in the actual show. This is technically our very first administration agent we've ever seen in physical form, and I really do like it. It utilizes a tan coat, which we first saw saw in LEGO City a couple years back, but they've used this in a couple of other sets since, like the Bricklink Designer Program sets use it for the Transylvania set, and then the sunglasses face is also a print from LEGO City, but it works very well for this character here. Honestly, there's not much else I have to say about this one. It's pretty close to the show despite not actually utilizing any new parts, and is a really good example of the designers absolutely maximizing budget here to make literally every single minifigure in this set feel at least somewhat important to the overarching lore of Ninjago. So, well done. One of the classic returning Ninjago characters here is the Postman. We haven't seen the Postman in a set since the very first Ninjago D2C over 10 years ago, with 2015's Temple of Jitsu. One of the really interesting things here is that the Postman receives a brand new head, and it's a little bit different than the original one. You see, the original Postman had a mustache above his goatee. However, in the animation, this mustache actually disappeared when they transitioned over to the 11-minute era of Ninjago, and instead, his face more closely resembles Warden Noble. And because of this, Lee decided to give us a different variant of the Postman, the one that appears in the more modern seasons of Ninjago without the mustache, so you can choose to use the head and swap it out for a generic city policeman, and boom, you have two minifigures in one, and you basically have a legacy Warden Noble being used for this minifigure as well, which is really cool. Of course, the rest of the design is very close to the original minifigure. When we compare the two, you can see the back printing is almost identical. It's actually one of the closest legacy remake designs that I've ever seen, but instead of the cross satchel, this time he has a backpack, which is a lot more in line with his appearances as he delivers mail to the monastery of Spinjitzu, which of course is sort of referenced in this set with the design of the gateway. This minifigure is a really solid one to get, and I feel like it was one of the most perfect minifigures to include in this particular set because it harkens back to that original LEGO Ninjago direct-to-consumer that really started it all with sets like these. So I'm very pleased about this one, super excited to have this added to the Ninjago collection for folks who did not get him the first time over 10 years ago, and there's really nothing else I have to say negatively about this figure. With that, it's time to move on to the third section of the set. This is one of the smaller sections you put together, but it is absolutely still packed full of detail, and I've also included the Nia minifigure alongside here for reasons I am about to explain. But first, let's take a look at the main build. This is a cross between a building and nature, and it really serves as a nice transition point as you kind of go alongside the side of the actual structure, but much like the other sides of the build, we're going to take a look at the outside first. This is the most nature-focused part of the set, which is really nice with some amazing rock work being done here. Again, Lee Chi-wing is utilizing all of the different studs in the side techniques to accomplish the different rock elements being used here, from the ingots being used in gray for the studs in the side techniques, to again that olive green growing as the moss, plus some brighter flowers factored into the design of the set itself. You have some nice trees growing up on the side, again lots of trees growing throughout the side of the build here, like this one, once again factored in, utilizing studs in these side techniques, and then you have a really clever building technique here, utilizing Technic attachments as angle points to make it look like this building is kind of hanging off the side of the cliff. This is one of my favorite parts of the set, and I really do appreciate how this just looks visually. Even though this is a part of the set that you probably won't even see that much because it's kind of near the back of the model, Lee still managed to factor in a lot of really great detail when it comes to these wooden supports underneath, and then the angled red supports right here. And of course, there's a little frog there as well. Moving on to the other side though, of course, you have this nice little build here that kind of acts as a bit of a watchtower. Of course, I do want to focus in on the nature area first here, which showcases a little running waterfall in transparent blue. Absolutely love the detail here. This is a beautiful build, and I love how you can see the water sort of trickling along the side of the rocks. You have another great use of rock work here, and the angled elements being used for the rocks here to really showcase this more organic style of build. You have these little areas to pose minifigures. I like how the rocks feel circular as well, like you're jumping across a stream, and you even have a sign showcasing different parts of the build. A sign leading you to the museum area and the postman's place, as well as a sign leading you to the entrance area, so that is really cool how that's actually factored into the build itself. Different ladders and walkways allow you to access the guard post right here, which also seems to be a little bit of a reference to the Ninjago pilots. There was a scene in the pilots where Nia is waiting for the ninja to return at the 4 Weapons blacksmith, and she's lit a candle while waiting for them to return, and well, that very candle is here. And we know that this was actually an intentional reference because as we lift off the roof, which actually does separate off, you can see a sticker showcasing that original 4-weapons blacksmith right there, hinting that this is meant to be kind of like part of that same design. You of course have a crossbow as well as a telescope factored in here, which is looking very nice as just extra accessories. And then of course the build technique for the roof is very simple. Honestly, it's utilizing just the standard pagoda plate elements, but I think it works pretty okay for a build like this. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised that it isn't a little bit more complicated. This feels like a very simple and repetitive technique to use for one of the roofs, but hey, if it works, why change it? And I think it does look really nice, so honestly, I can't really knock it that much. I do like a lot of the little details here, like even just the inclusion of the studs in the side building techniques right here to make the middle pillar feel a little bit more ornate and detailed, just adds so much more to the detailing of this model and makes me really appreciate it for what it is. But with that, now let's move on from this middle section and take a closer look at the Legacy Nia minifigure right here. Next up, we have Nia. Nia is returning from the 4-weapons blacksmith set in her traditional 2011 kimono outfit, which has been redesigned for 2026 in Ninjago Legacy. I like that they're utilizing her older hairpiece. I think it would have looked very strange with the newer style of hair, and anyways, we actually know that the new Nia hairpiece is out of production, so they literally did not have a choice other than to use the old one, which I think fits this minifigure very well. Of course, they have updated the design ever so slightly. They have made the bands on the torso for the attachment piece for the kimono a lot larger to make it just very clear in terms of detailing. They have reflective metallic gold printing used for the logos on the side of the torso as well, which look really good, and the print quality and depth of the printing for the belt just look a lot better than the original. There's these little plus symbols or flower symbols integrated into the belt which just look absolutely phenomenal and really just raise the level of standard of detail that you would come to expect for a standard Ninjago minifig. Of course, comparing her next to the original one from 2011, that one didn't even have back printing because 15 years ago, it was not normal to give minifigures back printing, and I'm very happy that's normal now. Maybe in 15 more years, it'll be normal to have minifigures with dual molded arms and legs and printing on the sides of arms and legs. A man can wish. But still, it is very cool to see how much LEGO printing can improve over the years and just how much of a better design this is compared to the original. Of course, the only thing that has been removed from the OG figure is the bandana, which she wore on the minifigure, but she never actually wore in the show, so honestly, it's not even that big of a deal that they didn't decide to make a brand new head here because that never was something that was super closely tied to the show anyways. This to me is a really good example of a Legacy remake done right, taking the original figure and just making literally everything about it a lot better. And now we have the final building of the entire set. This is the tallest tower and the last thing that you build, easily eating up the most amount of bags and containing the most amount of build references to actual characters in the actual building. In fact, at the end of the section, we'll be taking a look at a ton of different minifigures, from the 3 different minifigures for the Time Twins, Zayn and Dr. Julian making an appearance in minifigure form for the first time, Harumi in her Kabuki mask form, the Loyalist gang, which is the main villain faction for season 4, and of course at the end of all of that we'll have to take a look at one last set of minifigures. But first, let's take a look at the main build itself. There's a lot to unpack here, and as usual, I'm going to start around with the back of this model first, because this is actually the outside of the actual old town itself. Going around the back, this is a lot of amazing detail that you can see packed in. There's immediately some great references I want to point out here. This one actually took me a second to get, but it's the Two Moon Village from the Garmadon comic series, the very first set of Garmadon comics. Very, very cool how they actually have that factored into a sticker here, and a pretty niche reference unless you've actually read the comics. The other reference here is a lot more easy to see, and that is Shintaro, the Golden City from Ninjago Season 13, Master of the Mountain. Really cool to see that. I think we've seen Shintaro featured in a couple of different reference stickers now, but this one is really cool because it actually depicts the city itself and not just the dungeons underneath. Of course, this entire area is another archway, which is meant to be another entrance or exit to the old town itself. It's built using surprisingly complex building techniques. You would not expect there to be so many different layers here, but if you kind of zoom in, you might notice that there's all sorts of different plates being used and studs in the side details to really lock these in as, again, being super solid parts of the build. These are not just simply stacked bricks, there's actually a lot of really dense interlocking going on. Even the poster references are helping lock together particular sections of the build to make this another very sturdy part of the build and make sure that it doesn't actually come apart. Of course, the rest of it is fully detailed as well. You have a nice little hidden away rock passage, and you have a little secret entryway. This really reminds me of a lot of older LEGO castle sets. I think this exact play feature was in one of the classic LEGO Forest Men sets, so it's really cool to see this rock that kind of slides and pivots open to showcase a hidden away section, which we'll take a look at in a second here. And then you get to this really beautiful build for the tree trunk. Lee is always a master at integrating trees into builds. We first saw it for the Temple of the Dragon Energy Cores, and then we saw it for the Dragonstone Shrine, and here it is at a little bit of a smaller scale, but still retaining the amazing detail we've come to expect out of his models. You have the macaroni element from LEGO Technic and Dreams being used here to add a really great curvature to the roots of the tree. You then also have these vines kind of creeping alongside the edge, really going into the ground there, and really makes it feel like this is integrated into the ground. And then you have the usage of these LEGO Technic kind of curved elements here, just to really make it look like the vines are wrapping around the entire tree. All of it comes together very nicely, and of course, on the tree is easily one of my favorite references in the entire set, which is Maro's kite that he flew in Season 5 Possession in the flashback when Wu actually adopted Maro into training him to become the Green Ninja. Going on from here to the top of the tree, you've got some beautiful pink and white flowers. Really love the aesthetic here, especially with that kind of dragon horn element being used for the rest of the tree, and it just all comes together really nicely. For a set that's based off of the old town, the nature part of the set is really solid here, and I love how all of that accumulates in a beautiful pond, which you can see up here, with one of the relatively newer flower elements floating on top of these transparent blue tiles from the Minecraft theme that really just adds a lot of extra detail to this entire build. Of course, going along the side here, you've got some really great rockwork being used, as well as a little bit of a hidden away connector. What possibly could that be for? Well, we may have to see future expansions in the future if this set actually does well, which, judging by the state of the LEGO store I got this from, I'm pretty sure this is doing very well. Moving alongside to the front here, we'll take a look at the interiors in a second. You have some great building techniques being used here to have these steps actually go upwards into the pond itself. This is super cleverly done. All of these are slopes that are mounted on the side, which really gives you the illusion of these very uneven rocky steps, which just looks so good and smooth. It feels like the building technique out of a professional mock, not a standard LEGO set made for kids, and that's something that really blows me away by the building techniques here feeling incredibly advanced and just really clean in their execution. Of course, you do have a nice little waterfall flowing downwards here. The only minor thing that I have to say about this one, and it's a super minor detail, but it kind of just looks very obviously like the waterfall here is just stuck studs on the side utilizing the bracket piece. It looks like obviously the design choices were made here to make it look like it's flowing out of a crack in the rocks, or maybe that it's flowing out of a little crack here, but honestly, it just feels kind of tacked on compared to a lot of the other really nicely integrated waterfalls in the rest of the set. I understand that obviously you're working with limited space, but that's just one little detail that I feel like maybe could have been cleaned up by, I don't really know how I would have even done it, but maybe even making that piece transparent blue to make it look like the water trail is flowing from inside of the rock. Not really sure how I would have solved that problem, but it feels a little bit glaring right there. Other than that, though, I think the rest of the nature element here is done amazingly. I think that the detail here is fantastic. You've got, again, that olive green color being used to suggest moss, which I really like. And then, of course, some great studs upside down elements and studs in the side pieces being used here for the side of the rockwork itself. Moving on to the exterior of the lower ground floor of the building here, we'll start off by taking a look at this section actually. This door opens up and spiders might be in the house sleeping, because you can see in here there is a cobweb with a spider on the inside hinting at the return of Harumi as the Kabuki mask in Ninjago crystallized. It's a real crystastrophe in there, and it's very cool to see that actually factored into an actual set, especially because early concepts and ideas to bring back Harumi in crystallized realized involved turning her into some sort of a cyborg spider, and those were only scrapped when LEGO Monkey Kid did the same thing with the Spider Queen, so it's kind of cool to actually get an actual spider build in a set for Harumi, even though it's just this little tucked away cupboard. Of course though, the entire back of this area is hiding a much more important detail, and that is probably the most canon part of this entire set, and that is, when you slide open this rock, of course you can swing this entire area outwards, and you have revealed the hidden chamber of the Loyalists. This is actually a location that will appear in Season 4 of Dragons Rising. The old town itself will be featured in the animation, and I personally am very excited to see what exactly that's going to look like and how they're going to translate this very unique environment into the show. But basically, in the show, the Loyalists who are loyal to the Imperium regime will have set up shop in the old town, in the caves underneath it and the catacombs beneath, to really showcase maybe this is a way for them to summon the elemental monsters. You can see a nice sticker there showcasing the elemental monster symbol, as well as a different script than we're used to. It's not just Ninjargon, it's a different language. Maybe it's Throxian or some sort of other evil Ninjago language that they're using to bring power to the elemental monsters. And then of course a great poster for Empress Beatrix, which also doubles as a Dragons Rising Season 1 reference as well. So very cool to see that being factored in here, and I have no idea what this is supposed to be. Of course that will be revealed in the show, and this is again literally going to be a location in the show itself, so very excited to see that appear. But as of right now, you have this little hidden away, tucked away corner of the set that is supposed to reference a set of episodes that aren't even out yet, which is very, very cool. One of the other really nice details I really appreciate here is that the designer did not need to do this, but you can still see a bit of the tree trunk factored into the inside of the cave, suggesting that the tree is growing onto the inside of the cave itself. It is such a minor, small detail that honestly, I feel like any other designer would have probably just have it built in as standard rock, but I really appreciate how that is congruent with the tree going on the outside of the build here, and that is just so cool. We're going to pause this part of the model here to take a quick look at the Loyalist minifigures themselves. We have the Loyalist leader as well as one of the Loyalists included in the set, and then of course I also want to take a look at Harumi, who has her little cupboard featured there as well. So let's take a look at these three minifigures right now. We'll start off with the Loyalist leader. I've talked about this minifigure a ton in my Dragons Rising Season 4 coverage, but honestly, I feel like it is one of the least interesting main villain Ninjago minifigures of all time, and a lot of that boils down to the fact that it reuses the exact same torso and legs as the minions, something no other Ninjago villain has ever done. I understand that this was definitely to cut down on budget, given that Dragons Rising Season 4 is sharing the same budget as Ninjago Legacy, and both of them are considered one theme. I can understand why the villains took a bit of a hit for Dragons Rising this time, especially with so many other minifigure slots being allocated to the legacy characters, but it is a bit unfortunate to have the main villain of a season be relegated to having a relatively uninteresting design. Still, I do like how the design of the minifigure does tie into presumably what we're going to see in the story, with the color scheme of the robes being in dark red, black, and gold, signifying their allegiance to the old rulers of Imperium like Empress Beatrix, as well as the nicely printed staff and mask showcasing the different forms of the elemental monsters. A spiked tentacle, a rock-like horn, even a bit of fire sticking out of the side of the mask. All of those are really cool to showcase how this is a summoner of elemental monsters. And of course, reversing the head reveals the secret identity of Dr. LaRoe, who has appeared in minifigure form before for Ninjago City workshops, but we're actually getting her brought to the forefront as one of the main villains this time around for Ninjago Dragons Rising Season 4, which I am very excited to see play out. While the minifigure graphic design isn't the craziest, I do like that it is relatively streamlined and clean, especially because it feels like this minifigure really does service the story. Moving on from that though, we can take a look at the Loyalist included in the set, and this is going to be a very quick one because the Loyalist utilizes the exact same torso and leg print as the Loyalist leader. You can see that you have the emblem of the elemental monsters on the back of the torso there, and one thing I actually do really appreciate about the way this minifigure is made is that the dual-sided heads actually showcase two different masks being used for the villainous character here. So if you amass an army full of them, at least it looks like the two different even multiple copies of minifigures can act as different characters. One of them has a much larger and more rocky set of eyebrows on the mask with an angry gritted teeth expression, and the other one has a much more elegant and clean style of crown for the top of the head with a grinning toothy expression there. Another really cool thing that I like about these is that they utilize the Darksaber as their accessory. This is an element that has appeared in a couple of different colors outside of LEGO Star Wars, but never as an actual sword until now, and I'm really happy that piece isn't license locked, especially in this color, because I feel like it is a really cool element and one that will certainly look very cool in the TV show itself if they actually are using it in the show. Honestly, it's hard to tell these days if they actually ever will use the weapons included in these sets. The last minifigure we'll take a look at here is easily one of the most anticipated one to be included in the set, and that is Harumi in her crystallized kabuki mask getup. The set does include an alternate hairpiece so you can showcase Harumi with or without the mask, utilizing the exact same facial expression from a very infamous scene of Ninjago Crystallized, but starting off with the kabuki mask form, I feel like this is a really nice translation of the character into physical minifigure form. The mask itself looks really good with the blue and white being very menacing. It is obviously just the animation of the torso reusing some of the same designs we saw for the Legacy Ghosts, and it's kind of funny how LEGO kind of made that initial torso, and then the animation studio decided to take the design of that initial torso and recolor it in just dark gray and black for this outfit, and now we are getting the torso brought back again, just recolored in these colors and slightly changed and modified to showcase Harumi's design. Of course, you can turn around the head to showcase that it's okay, she's with us. The very controversial scene from Crystallized, honestly one of my least favorite scenes, absolutely ridiculous but very funny how Lee was able to include literally that exact facial expression when detailing a happier face for Harumi, which is something we haven't really seen recently. We've gotten evil grins, angry scowls, and very loud and angry expressions, but none quite like this, so it's good to get a bit of variety here. Of course, you can compare this next to the original Harumi figure that came out for Crystallized, and it's nice just seeing the slight differences between the facial expression there. Obviously, this was after the Overlord was defeated, so the purple tint to the eyes is gone, and then of course, I managed to bring along every single Harumi minifigure we have gotten so far to compare this alongside all of the others. My favorite is still Casual Harumi. That was a minifigure I'd been wanting for so long, and I was so happy to get it in Ninjago City Workshop last year. Unfortunately, no printed legs on that one, but I still do feel the rest of the minifigure just kind of makes up for that. The expression on the face is perfect, the hairpiece is really cool, but of course, there's been a lot of really interesting variants of the character over the years, like the incredible Princess Harumi form with that beautifully printed cape, as well as Avatar Harumi referencing Kill Bill, which is really cool to see from the Prime Empire series in 2020. Of course, we even got a Bricktober exclusive Harumi with the Oni Mask of Hatred featuring printed arms and legs, easily the most detailed version of the character we have gotten so far. So, altogether, we pretty much have literally every single variation of the character we could possibly hope for. We probably will never see this character again. I mean, maybe never say never, but at least in minifigure form, unless she pops up again in the TV show, we now have covered literally all of her outfits. There are no other outfits to make other than I guess the leg printing for the casual ones. So maybe they could do a hooded version, but honestly I feel like LEGO is pretty satisfied with the amount they've put out so far, and I wouldn't expect to see any more beyond these. And with that, we can move on to the upper part of the set, but there's actually one last Easter egg, or actually a pair of Easter eggs I do want to touch on before we move up here. There's an Easter egg hidden into the building right there, as well as one hidden into the building in the area right here. So let's take a look at that right now. Our first Easter egg built into the model is of course Nadakon the Jinn's Teapot of Tyran, the teapot in which he was trapped in during Season 6 Skybound and eventually freed by the ghostly form of Klaus until the entire season was undone, and of course now the teapot is forever lost. The other reference is even funnier to me because it's actually the decapitated head of Morrow's mortal body. You can tell it's Morrow by the green base and the hairpiece used, hinting this is the exact skeleton we actually see in Season 5 Possession. Now let's move on to the upper levels of this area. You have an entire section dedicated to Dr. Saunders, and you can see in Ninjargon there it actually spells Dr. Saunders's for the museum. Very nice to see that, as well as the Ninjago Museum of History logo factored into the building here. One of the things I want to point out as we actually enter the frontier are these really nice little golden lions. The actual Ninjago Museum in the show has these much larger lions factored in, so it's cool to see a smaller museum office, or kind of like a satellite office for the museum, have these much smaller brick-built lions, and I really like how even just by using a few different pieces, they instantly are recognizable as creatures, utilizing the wheels of roller skates as eyes for the creatures there, which work really well. The only thing that I probably will do actually, and I'll do that right now, is flip this piece around right here. The instruction manual has you build 2 of these and then actually just put them side by side, but of course the roller skate pieces are actually asymmetrical, and I think it looks a little bit nicer when you have the bit of the upper edge on each side here. It's a very minor nitpick, and obviously for the purposes of the instruction manual it makes total sense as to why it just has you build these twice and stick them on, but for my purposes I'm going to be displaying them with one of the lips on each side to just make it feel a bit more symmetrical as you enter into this building. There's a number of ways that you can actually access the area here, namely pulling out different parts of the wall and being able to see the inside of the building, but first I do want to take a look at the actual exterior of the building itself. One of the things that Lee built in were references to the original Temple of Spinjitzu, which featured a building utilizing the sand green color and the medium blue color, and both of those are represented in the 2 buildings here. So it's really cool how those are actually factored into the uppermost buildings of the set, paying homage to the very first direct-to-consumer Ninjago set that was geared towards, if not adults, at least towards older kids. Of course, we have a lot of different areas to enter here, so let's start taking a look at the inside and seeing all the references hidden away. You can remove this wall here, which showcases a ladder bringing you to the upper section, and yes, minifigure access has been fully accounted for, but you can also review this section right here and reveal a lot of great Easter eggs here, and these feature some of my favorite Easter eggs in the entire set. Starting off with this wall here, we have the Mirror of Fear. As seen in Season 11 Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu, the ninja faced their greatest fears in the mirror reflection, which eventually would all come true over the course of the 11-minute era. This, of course, is depicting Lloyd seeing himself as Emperor Garmadon in the mirror, which is very cool to see that. Of course, that technically belongs in the Explorers Club, but I think a museum makes a lot of sense for it as well. You have a scroll featuring dragon form, where the ninja have to jump up, kick back, whip around, and spin to unlock dragon form, as well as a scroll detailing the Day of the Departed lunar eclipse, which only happens once every many hundreds of years, and it's really cool to see that being factored into an actual sticker here as well, because this is actually the first thing that you see in the Day of the Departed special. You kind of see the different scrolls showcasing the lunar eclipse right there, which is very cool. Going on to the inside of Saunders' office though, you have a scroll of Forbidden Spinjitzu. This one is actually stickered onto a piece here, as opposed to being one of the vinyl kind of foil elements they introduced for Season 11 in 2019, so it's really cool to get that. The scroll on the desk here, which I want to remove to showcase in greater detail, is showcasing the ninja in their positions for the Temple of Light, harkening back to Season 2 Legacy of the Green Ninja, when the ninja unlocked their kimono robes, their elemental swords, and of course had Lloyd unlock his true power at the Temple of Light, and it's very cool to get that as an actual sticker. There's one other really great and cute reference in here, and that actually is this little book. This is the book that Master Wu reads to Lloyd in Season 1 when he takes Lloyd in at the end of the episode about Pythor, called Never Trust a Snake, and regardless of what that may say about Serpentine or how Frack may feel about it today, this is the little book that Wu read to Lloyd to teach him to never trust a snake, and you can actually see that written inside the book itself, and that is the graphic design of the book as seen from that early Season 1 episode. Again, this is a really cute reference to a classic Ninjago season. Very cool to get that in the set, and it's literally just tucked away inside this little part of Dr. Saunders' office there. Honestly, very easy to miss, but really happy that's been factored into the set. Of course, you do have a relatively spacious area for minifigures as well to be posed around in, which I do appreciate. Very cool to see. Just a little bit of a carpet detailed here as well, with the dark green and white being factored into the carpet. And with that, well, I think it's time to take a look at some minifigures, namely Dr. Saunders, of course, the curator of the Ninjago Museum of History, and secretly the time twin Crux in disguise. We get young Crux and young Acronix in this set as kind of hidden away anniversary figures that tie into these Serpentine War minifigures, and let's take a look at these incredibly exciting figures right now. Here is Dr. Saunders. I am shocked we are getting a Dr. Saunders minifigure in 2026. Ever since his initial debut in 2016 for the TV show in Day of the Departed, he was revealed to be one of the villainous Hands of Time in Season 7, The Hands of Time, in 2017 as Crux, but we never actually got a physical version of Dr. Saunders, unless you count the older version of Crux, who did have the alternate face showcasing the Dr. Saunders identity, which actually is what gave it away for the show leaks itself. This, however, is a fully detailed version of the character. He has for the first time a brand new museum curator torso print and leg printing, which is very nice. I honestly did not expect leg printing for this character, but it is really good to get it. The belt is printed very nicely. You have the dark red coat transitioning downwards to the leg, and of course he has the traditional pocket watch, which he uses to check the arrival of his brother Acronix. I love the inclusion of the Ninjago Museum of History logo on the back of the torso. I think it looks really good, and of course, the only major thing missing from this minifigure is the specialized beard. Dr. Saunders had this Fu Manchu style of beard that he wore in 2017, which never was an actual LEGO piece, and sadly they decided not to create a brand new mold for it for this set. I can imagine why. I don't really necessarily think they needed to make a brand new mold that would only literally be used on probably this one minifigure and no other characters, so I can see why LEGO chose not to do it, but unfortunately I feel like that was such a major part of the Dr. Saunders persona that I honestly don't even know if it was necessarily worth making the minifigure without it. There are a couple of other beards they could have used. The one that comes to mind was the new beard piece they introduced just last year for the One Piece theme in the Baratier for Zeph. That was a two-pronged beard that was braided, so it wasn't necessarily the exact same look and feel, but it was definitely a lot closer than having no beard at all. However, that piece debuted in the brand new ochre orange color that was introduced for LEGO Friends and One Piece last year, and we haven't gotten it in any color since, so I understand that given how budget constrained this entire set was, it probably was too much of an ask to recolor that piece to light gray, especially because it's not a one-to-one match anyways. Still, the facial expression is very good. I like how he's grinning, which is very different than the original Dr. Saunders facial expression, which had a more confused or serious look to him, which was kind of hinting at the secret identity underneath. So I'm very happy with this one, which is more reflective of the persona that he shows towards the ninja. Of course, comparing it next to the original face, you can see they've really cleaned up the printing a little bit. One thing that is a very minor detail that I think is actually very cool about what they did is that all of the minifigures wearing glasses in this set showcase the slightly colored in glasses, and their eyes are a bit of a different color to show the eyes behind the reflective lenses. However, since Dr. Saunders' glasses are fake, and they presumably don't have any lenses in them, they did not choose to color in the lenses, and instead his eyes are the standard color. I don't know if that was an intentional detail or something they just did to match up with the TV show, but I think it is really clever how the other two minifigures in this same set that do wear glasses have their eyes colored a slightly different shade underneath, but Dr. Saunders does not. But of course, when Dr. Saunders is here, we have to take a look at his alter ego, the villainous time twin Crux as well. Now we are getting two different time twins in this set, Crux and Acronix, and both of them are in their younger versions as seen in the flashbacks to these Serpentine Wars. These are technically supposed to be stealth anniversary figures, which is really nice because they fit alongside the collection of all of the other minifigures we're getting for the anniversary lineup, like the Elemental Masters of Lightning, Earth, Ice, and so on and so forth. Crux, of course, is actually the third time we have gotten him as a minifigure. We did get Young Crux before as a Bricktober exclusive, but unfortunately, That minifigure seemed to be very sloppily put together. When you look at that original minifigure design, they literally took the modern day version of Crux and just kind of erased the hourglass, but they didn't even fill in the graphic design for the rest of the torso, so there's a very awkward empty spot on the front of the torso, and then you can even see the bottom of the hourglass still printed on the legs, so they did not put like any effort into that original young Crux minifigure other than the new print for the face. They didn't even give him the right hairpiece. They just gave him a standard vermilion helmet with the snake sticking out. So this is a real proper version of young Crux. And one thing they did to maximize on budget for this set was to use the same dual-sided head for Dr. Saunders. So one side is the elderly Dr. Saunders and the other side is the younger version of Crux, which is something I really appreciate. The Time Twins do also share the same torso and legs for budgetary reasons, but the colors of the arms are swapped from one to the other because I feel like you wouldn't really have the essence of the Time Twins without that asymmetrical design. Of course, he does have 1x1 studs in his hand symbolizing the elemental powers of time that he is using, which I think makes sense because in the show his hands are glowing, so it makes sense to represent that using colored studs. I think it would have been really cool to have different multicolored hands be used here, but I can see why they just decided to use the standard black hands, so you can use the minifigures as if they're not using their powers, and then put on the studs when they are. Of course, it is good to get the Crux hairpiece. It's a relatively standard hairpiece. They've been using it for Luke Skywalker for a while in black, and that is a common piece that didn't necessarily need to be recolored just for this set, but it looks really good and totally matches up with the animation from Season 7. Comparing him next to the original versions, it is clear that this is a nice evolution of the armor. I like the changes they've made to the torso because previously, Crux Necronics had two different torso print and designs, but this time, they use the same torso, and because of that, some of the armor elements have had to be made more symmetrical across both of them, but they've made clear compromises here that make it still look like these are very different designs and different characters when all is said and done. The final Time Twin included in the set is young Acronix, who is technically just regular Acronix because during the time of the Serpentine Wars, he basically was transported immediately to the future. Still, it is really nice to get a version of the character without having the printed on Borg pad, as well as the headphones around his neck, which were very goofy looking, I think, that kind of detracted a little bit from the design of the original, which initially had a very menacing design outside of just those extra details, showcasing he was slightly transplanted outside of his normal place in time. This is a really nicely detailed minifigure, and of course, he is just using the same torso and legs as his brother Young Crux in this set, but I think it works okay for this minifigure, especially because they really did try to make it seem like there's enough variability in the armor that unless you're looking way too closely, this feels close enough to the original design that also feels a lot cleaner than the minifigure that we got before. Of course, this time his powers are represented with single 1x1 studs because, well, not only are the Time Blades not in production anymore, but due to the era that this minifigure takes place in, the Time Blades actually were not created yet, and he was simply channeling his elemental power through his hands. Once again, I think it would have been really cool to get multicolored hands here. I think that would have added a little bit of something extra to showcase the hands themselves glowing, but again, I understand why they didn't do that, so you can choose to either have the powers on or off without having to remove the hands from the torso. It's a fun design, and I do like how he has a very angry expression on one side and a simple smile on the other, which definitely is very consistent with the character, and it actually is a lot better than his original headpiece because that one had the digital mouthpiece printed on it, so you couldn't actually use him for the Serpentine War flashbacks, and he also just had a standard grin on the previous version of the figure, so this one actually does have a really nice set of two different expressions to give more character to the model. The only thing missing on both of these figures is the green cloth pauldron, which was a cool element of their designs, but honestly not something that I feel was super necessary, especially for the Serpentine War variants of the characters, who, as we see in flashbacks, have slightly more pared down and simplified versions of their armor. Now let's move on to the upper section of the build. One thing I forgot to mention here is that the roof actually is also removable, and it's a really interesting build technique for the roof itself. This is actually surprisingly complex for what it is, because you can see that you've got some really interesting designs for studs in the side detailing. These pieces are mounted at angles on the hinge joints here, which is really cool to see, and I also love this really unique building technique being used here to truly lock in this studs in the side build here, utilizing an extra Force robot hand and the clip and bar element to really just make sure this clips into place. Very, very simple as a building technique, but something that works very well, and honestly not something I've seen used in a lot of other LEGO sets. This is not the only set I've seen it be used in, but it's actually quite nice to see that, and also how nicely this roof element fits in here, just tessellating pretty perfectly as you slot it in as the museum roof. But now, let's go on to the uppermost section of this build. At the top here, you have a couple of different areas for a workshop, as well as a few more Easter eggs and references factored in. This balcony here has a lot of really cool references just literally tucked away, and honestly, it's almost unfortunate how tucked away they are because it's a little difficult to be able to actually get access to this. You can remove the window here, and I guess you can remove the roof as well to really see inside here, but otherwise this is kind of a storage area where you can see that maybe Crux is also a Ninjago fan, because it seems like he's collected some classic Ninjago sets in his attic. In there, of course, is the movie Destiny's Bounty. Really cool to see that as an actual stickered element. We actually did already get a sticker for this exact set for the LEGO Inside Tour Vault set, but it's really cool to finally be able to see that be made available in a retail set as well, and the graphic design is a little bit different than the one they used there. You also have the original 2012 Destiny's Bounty, mint in sealed box right there on the shelves. I'm very jealous of Crux right now. And then you also have the newspaper showcasing Twitchy Tim's gas station, a reference to the island in Ninjago season. Of course, going on from that, we have another of my absolute favorite murals on the side of the wall here, and this is the Legend of the Oni and Dragon, first seen on the back of Mistake's tea shop during the Oni and Dragon episode of Season 8 Sons of Garmadon. This showcases the war between the Oni and Dragon in the First Realm and how they threaten to destroy all of creation in their battles. So very cool to see that, very crucial piece of Ninjago lore being factored in here, and very cool to see that as a sticker. Now let's kind of close this up. You can put this little window back in place here, stick the roof back on, and we can take a look going on to the upper section of the build. You have a zipline element here, which you can actually use for the zipline that attaches right there, and we'll take a look at that when we kind of zoom out and see the build as a whole. But up here we actually have a lookout area. This is a great area where you can see a telescope mounted on one of those robot arms. You have the Woo hat being used as detail. Another great set of roofing build techniques here, again utilizing that clip element piece that I was showcasing, really just showcasing the amazing studs in the side building techniques for the roof here. But that entire thing does come apart because this whole thing is a bit of a workshop. It's not explicitly meant to be the Tinkerer's workshop, but it kind of works that way, and you can imagine that he's studying a couple of different things, and namely, you can see in here that there is a reference to Season 3 Rebooted with the newspaper detailing the findings of the astronaut, where they actually found the fossilized bugs inside the alien astronaut, a very controversial part of Ninjago lore featuring them going to space. But I think it's very cool to see that be factored in as the actual newspaper from the show. And then you have another of my favorite stickers, and I keep saying this, like there's like 50 favorite stickers I have in this set, but this one is really truly amazing, showcasing the battle between Niad and Wojira as seen in some of the first few episodes of Ninjago Seabound. In fact, the graphic design was done so well here that they actually turned this into a minifigure factory torso print that you can purchase right now from LEGO.com to celebrate 15 years of Ninjago, where you can get a minifigure with that Wojira design printed on the shirt. And that's how good of a reference that is. But with that, we have finally summed up every single individual level and detail of the entire Old Town building. But first, we have to take a look at the last two standard minifigures in the set, Dr. Julian and Zayn. So let's take a look at these two right now. We've come to what might be one of the most anticipated minifigures in the entire set, and that is, of course, Dr. Julian, a character first introduced in Season 1, A Rise of the Snakes back in 2012, but one that we never saw in minifigure form until 2026 right now. It is honestly shocking to me to see how long it's taken them to release a Dr. Julian minifigure. Previously, LEGO designers have stated that they couldn't release him because the character was dead, but clearly that rule has changed for this set because despite his status in the LEGO Ninjago show, they were able to finally make him as a minifigure. Lee did mention that this was one of the final minifigures to be included in the lineup here, and he mostly included it because most people were saying they really wanted Dr. Julian after not getting it in Ninjago City workshops last year, and so This was a very last-minute add. Because of that, he wasn't able to include leg printing on the minifigure, which is a little bit unfortunate, but honestly, I feel like this minifigure didn't necessarily need leg printing, and as Bricks My Mind has showed us, you can actually use the legs from one of the Garmadon tech workers from the LEGO Ninjago movie back in 2017, and that basically works almost 100% perfectly for the character to showcase the lab coat continuing on down past the pants. So there is an alternative present for those who do want to use it. As for me, I'm just very happy we're finally getting Dr. Julian in a set. I honestly had kind of given up hope that we would ever see him replicated in physical minifigure form, which was a shame because he was a very important part of Season 2 in particular, and it is so cool to be proven wrong and show that LEGO actually is capable of making him as a character. You have a brand new facial expression being used, one smiling and one scared, which really closely match the TV show, as well as a new print for the torso as well, which is very simple, but a super close match to the original design in the show. He's using what Lee refers to as a prototype version of the Falcon in the form of the black parrot here. Now, I've seen a lot of discussion about this online, and here's the thing. The Falcon piece they introduced for the collectible minifigure series would have been perfect to include in the set, but unfortunately, Lee was not able to use it. Either it was out of production or he wasn't able to use it in a standard retail set. And so, instead, he used the only piece that he actually had available, which was the black parrot here. Obviously, it's not meant to be the Falcon, it's kind of just meant to be a prototype, and I'm actually pretty happy this is included in the set because it literally only comes in 2 other sets so far, a Hogwarts Castle Flying Lesson set in 2025, as well as the Bricklink Designer Program Thieves of Tortuga set, which is a pretty rare set to get, so it's nice to get this in a 3rd set nowadays, but I do understand why fans were a little disappointed this just doesn't really match up with the design of the actual Falcon in the show at all. Still, I think it's a fun accessory to get. I'm happy we do have it, but I can see why people might be a little bit confused about its inclusion in this set. Our final ninja minifigure of the set is Zayn, and he is easily one of my favorite legacy remakes. Zayn was always my favorite character growing up from Ninjago, but I swear I'm not biased here, I do actually think that his redesign is probably one of the best out of all of the ninja. First of all, it's not just consistent to the original 2012 design, but it improves on it in almost every single way. My favorite part about it, though, is easily the brand new face they've introduced for Zayn. You have an expression where he is smiling, which perfectly matches the original TV show. Honestly, that expression just looks like it was peeled right from the show and is easily the best facial expression we've gotten for him so far. And then they also brought back the robot face, a face that we got for Ninjago Rebooted in 2014, but of course, we actually saw him with this half-robot face in 2012 when he was battle damaged by the Great Devourer in the finale of Ninjago Season 1, so they were able to bring it into this particular suit. What I've done to show some comparisons is I've brought alongside the original minifigure for Zayn ZX in 2012, but I've swapped the head with the original 2014 robotic head so you can actually see how that would look like underneath the hood as a comparison, but I've also filmed a couple comparisons with the standard head as well so you can really just see everything. Again, as I mentioned, this figure improves on the original one in almost every way. There are really no shortcomings. Unlike some of the other 2026 Legacy remakes, the symbol for Zayn is still centered in the center of the circular armor element on the back of the torso, which is very nice. The brown lines are really cleaned up and refined. You have the lighter reddish brown color being used, which really pops against the white and tan, and I also love how the tan on the robe isn't just a single strip of color. It's actually fully fleshed out this time with a little bit of creases factored into the actual belt to make it feel like it is a 3-dimensional part of clothing on Zayn himself. Of course, these sandals in tan look really good as well, and I do love the fact that they are dual molding the hood with the ZX crown to really just add that extra level of detail that won't be scuffed off in play. Unfortunately, really the only complaint is what I mentioned for some of the other ninja earlier in the video. The hood just sits a little too far down on minifigure faces, as opposed to the earlier one, which you can clearly see the eyebrows for all of the characters. This one, again, is one of those examples where even though I was swapping this head with the Anniversary display head that I got, it just wasn't really fitting to showcase the eyebrows for Zayn, and I feel like the eyebrows are such an important part of the ninja design. It's what's on the cover of every box, and it's very unfortunate to have these new ninja hoods look so good but cover up the eyebrows because they sit just a little too far down, too low on the ninja heads. Otherwise though, I think that this is a very clear improvement, showcasing how far LEGO minifigures have come over the past 15 years, and I am very happy to get these two new expressions for Zayn on a yellow head. Alright, so here we have all the different components of Old Town, and they come together very easily. As you can see, you just attach these pieces via Technic axles going into Technic pinholes, so there's no actual solid connection point between them. You kind of just slot it in, just like so. That section connects there, this one connects in right here, and then everything is tied together by the front gate. I actually think that this level of connection is very clever because it actually relies on the longer beam kind of tying in all of these sections to provide a little bit of stability when you actually connect the entire build, but also allowing you to kind of choose your own layout when you put everything together into one place. The only thing left to do is to connect the zip line right here from this building onto the lower one, and there you have it. With that connected, the Old Town is complete. Or is it? Because there's one more part of the set that's very, very important that I've been saving for the final thing in this video, and that is because it's the final thing you build, and that is the 15th anniversary Ninjago minifigure display, featuring young Wu, young Garmadon, and, for the first time, the first Spinjitzu Master in physical form. Let's take a look at this right now. Before we take a look at the actual minifigure designs, I do want to talk for a second about this amazing Ninjago 15 minifigure stand here. This is a really cool build and acts as a bit of a centerpiece to connect all of the different builds of the minifigure stands across the entire Ninjago 15-year anniversary lineup. This is patterned off of a lot of the other great stands we've gotten for Star Wars and Harry Potter anniversaries with LEGO in the past, which basically factors in these three minifigures but also acts as a really great modular connectivity point to allow you to attach some of the other stands from the sets. So let's take a look at that right now. I've brought alongside the Elemental Master of Lightning, Leo, as well as Benton, the Elemental Master of Earth, and let's see how everything is actually meant to connect. First thing you do here is you can actually separate off the different ends of the stand, and that actually will allow you to place on the different minifigures where you see fit, and then of course utilize those to actually connect up to the ends. And the way it's supposed to be done is that you actually rotate these around, put the minifigures on the other way, and connect them up this way, because by connecting these stands up like this, you don't have like a million different Ninjago 15 tiles facing front all the way, and this was actually intentionally done. It was so that you don't have so many different Ninjago 15 tiles facing front, and you really just have one set of Ninjago 15 to showcase the celebration. This was of course done so you don't have multiple Ninjago 15 tiles just decorating the front of every single minifigure stand, but instead allows you to kind of space them out a little bit. Of course, there's going to be two more anniversary minifigures coming, Hibernus, the Elemental Master of Ice, and a yet unknown Elemental Master or Serpentine War era minifigure coming in the final Legacy Summer set. We know that the hairpiece used is Misako's, so a lot of people think that it could either be young Misako, which I kind of hope it's not. I think that would be very boring, or the much more interesting alternative is that it's Dusk, the Master of Shadow, who doesn't use that hairpiece in the show, but the hairpiece she does use is the Pretzel Girl hairpiece, which was only used in 2013 in a CMF and never again, so I can see them trying to replicate the minifigure using that piece, but honestly, it's probably going to be Misako because I feel like she does have a lot of close ties to Wu and Garmadon, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Altogether though, this is the amazing beginnings of an anniversary minifigure stand. I think it looks so cool to have these connected, and it'll look even cooler with two more minifigures on each end, which I cannot wait to see what that last one is going to be. But now let's take a close look at the three minifigures actually included in this set. Here's our first anniversary minifigure, and it is Young Wu, based off of his early appearances in the Ninjago pilot shorts in 2011, and later in the flashbacks to the Serpentine Wars in 2015. He is utilizing the darker shade of kimono, but this time they've actually updated it, with some gold symbols on the side of the torso, dark tan being used heavily for the Wu color scheme, and a brand new facial expression, which works really well for the younger version of the character. I'm honestly really impressed they actually decided to make a brand new head print for him, because typically they probably could have used some sort of existing generic city head, but I'm really happy they chose to make a specialized one because it feels just a lot more quintessential to the character itself, even though the design in the show isn't the most unique. Of course, he has a dark tan staff and a single stud in his other hand representing the elemental power of creation, as well as the hair and dark tan there, and both sides of the head look really, really good. Obviously, this is super close to the design that you can already make with custom existing pieces, utilizing Wu's kimono from the later wave of the 2011 sets when he had his black kimono, but this one is just a lot more refined in detail and is brought into the level of quality that we'd expect to see from 2026 details of Ninjago minifigures. The younger version of Garmadon, however, the other minifigure included in this set, is a lot more interesting. I initially was hoping that these would be based off of their appearances in the Spinjitzu brothers books, but honestly, I actually do also love that they actually bothered to release the versions that we see throughout the TV show. Garmadon also originated from the Battle Between Brothers short in 2011, but we got this design fleshed out a lot more in the Serpentine War flashbacks as well. He has purple highlights on his robe as well as the red coloration of the symbol, hinting at the darkness inside of him, and to represent that, he actually has a transparent pink stud to represent his elemental power, the same stud that the more grown-up version of Garmadon is holding in this very same set. I love the two different expressions they've utilized for the character here. One of them has a smirk that is really similar to the original design for Lloyd, although a little bit more sinister compared to that earlier version, and then the other side you can see the venom of the Devourer has fully overtaken him with glowing red eyes and wrinkles on the side of his face, which is actually really close to one of the expressions we can see for some of the older Garmadon minifigures, but obviously with yellow skin this time. This honestly is so good that it feels like a custom minifigure. I can barely believe that this is legitimately a real design. After over 15 years of wanting LEGO to make this as a minifigure, they have finally made it happen, and the design is absolutely amazing. And speaking of taking 15 years to get a minifigure, here is the first Spinjitzu Master. Now this is a minifigure that I honestly never expected LEGO to ever produce because we barely see him in the show, and when we do, his face is always obscured. We see the back of his head with a ponytail throughout flashbacks in Season 11, Secrets of the Forbidden Spinjitzu, when he's crafting the Scrolls of Forbidden Spinjitzu, and we see a little bit of what his robes look like in March of the Oni, when Lloyd is in the balance between life and death and kind of sees him in a vision as he's about to transition to the afterlife, but we never actually see his face. So this is the first official face reveal of the Spinjitzu Master, although one thing I really love is that on the front of the box, you actually have him angled down a little bit so the hat is still covering his eyes. I do find it funny how literally just last year, they made a new conical hat piece that covers the eyes of a minifigure to make them look more mysterious, but they couldn't use it here because obviously he just uses the standard Sensei Wu hat in the show, and it just covers his eyes anyways, so that definitely was a tricky decision to make. I'm glad they went with the standard hat, but honestly, the facial expression I think kind of lines up with what I would expect, but it feels very safe and generic. Honestly, I was kind of hoping they would do something a bit more unique for the design of the first Spinjitzu Master's face. They have hidden his identity for so many years now that his face at this point was something that I was really excited to see what that might actually look like if we ever see it in the show, which I honestly doubt we ever will, but this is kind of just like a generic old man face. I think it would have been extra special if maybe they made his eyes golden or glowing yellow or something like that, just to showcase the elemental power, and then you could have also used it for a potential Forbidden Spinjitzu powered up Wu, but instead they went with a very generic design, and honestly, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it does line up with what most people imagine him to look like, but for 15 years of not showing his face, and for this to be the face they reveal, I definitely was expecting something a little bit more involved. Still, I do absolutely love the brand new design for robes they've given him. Instead of all of the other legacy minifigures, they've actually opted to give him a completely new design for the robes, featuring two sets of dragons on either side, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I really like how they chose to give him a new design, as opposed to give him a design similar to Wu's older kimono, because obviously we do get young Wu in his black kimono in this exact same set, so it made sense to give the FSM something a little bit different, and he even has brand new unique legs to boot. Of course, I did want to quickly showcase him next to his statue as well. This is the statue that's included that we looked at earlier on in this video, that again doesn't technically count as one of the minifigure lineup slots, but is a full-on minifigure with a printed torso, so I did want to showcase the two next to each other. But now, let's zoom out and take a look at the entire set. And there you have it. This has been our look at the incredible Old Town set. I really want to showcase what this looks like as a full-on combined build, because a lot of the nuance of how everything fits together is lost by taking a look at these sections one by one. So let's kind of take a look at these seams. You have a really nice connection point here for the same roofing technique to continue from this section onto the next. The tree is a really nice way to bridge the gap here to make the sections flow very seamlessly and make it look like the tree kind of damaged the top of the roof, causing it to cave in a little bit right here. Of course, going on to this side over here, there's a nice connection point with both of these lanterns making up the side of this building. Otherwise, there's only one lantern on this side and one on the other, but when you have it connected together, you actually have two different lanterns on this lookout post here, which makes it feel very complete and very congruent when you combine the different parts of the set. Of course, the rockwork here goes together very seamlessly. You have a little natural jumping off point for these circular rocks, making it almost look like you're supposed to post figures hopping from one rock to the other, so I really love how the connectivity works right here. And then of course, you can get to this section right here, and really, the only downside is that amazing Easter egg filled sticker right there is completely covered up with this connection, but obviously, I'm very happy they even bothered to make a separate sticker just for a wall that's literally covered up in the main build. So altogether, there is a lot to love, and everything comes together in a very visually cohesive way. This really reminds me of the classic LEGO castle sets built with all these different buildings surrounding an open courtyard, and that's something that Lee actually intended while designing it. He made this to kind of feel like a modern-day Ninjago-inspired version of a classic castle set, and that design aesthetic and influence is very apparent when you take a look at the entire model here. I really do love how it also does its own thing, showing that Ninjago still has a few tricks up its sleeve, and despite being around for 15 years, the theme can still give us a LEGO set the likes of which we have never seen before. In fact, the initial pitch from the higher-ups for this set was to make it a $300 Ninjago city, and Lee actually argued against making a standard modular city, instead opting to make a brand new style of set for the 15th anniversary, and to not make cities feel like we're getting way too many of them, and they're feeling less unique. And initially, that was a choice that I was very confused by. I thought that it was crazy to not release a city for the 15th anniversary, but after building this set, I can see why Lee decided to go this route, and I am very happy that everybody else at LEGO agreed and decided to make the flagship anniversary set based off of this very non-traditional layout. Having an old town be built up here in the non-city format really makes it feel like a much more organic build. Again, you have the rockwork being factored in, you have the front gate, you have the lookout tower, you have these taller towers up in the back here. All of that just comes together to a very visually pleasing build that feels like around every corner there is something new to see. The aesthetics are very consistent with all of the building techniques for this set, but again, not everything feels like it is just kind of its own homogenized zone. Everything flows very smoothly together. Clearly, Lee has been training his flow while working on this build. And honestly, the icing on the top of the cake is the minifigure selection. I think if you look at any fan's top wish list for minifigures that they've wanted to get in physical form but have never gotten before from Ninjago, most of the minifigures in this set are on that list, to the point that when the minifigure list first leaked, I legitimately did not believe it. I thought it was the most absolute BS fake rumor ever made. It sounded like wish list, like fan wish fulfillment, like, oh, imagine if we actually got all of these minifigures in one set, and they actually were perfectly detailed in all the ways we would want to have them be detailed in, and as it turns out, Lee actually managed to pull it off, giving us one of the most insane minifigure lineups we've ever seen for not just any Ninjago set, but honestly any LEGO set in general. There is a lot that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to making a brand new LEGO set, and this set really feels to me like a perfect example of a set that is fully optimized. LEGO designers are of course given a budget of a certain amount of frames they're allowed to use every time they design a brand new LEGO set. Frames can be new elements, they can be recolors, they can be new minifigures, new prints, even stickers cost frames, but everything is a trade-off. To put one thing in a set, that means means you lose another thing. And this set is so perfectly optimized. I am genuinely so blown away. There are very few recolors in this set. There are very few new pieces. In fact, I did not count a single new piece for 2026 other than new recolors factored into this set. And that is actually a very impressive feat, because that means that the rest of that budget went into giving us the best minifigure lineup possible. So a big shout out and thank you to Lychee Wing for bringing this incredible set to life. I know that so many Ninjago fans are so happy about this, are very pleased to get a set like this, and this truly feels like the perfect love letter to the Ninjago fandom, which I cannot believe has been around for 15 years. I still remember when I was 11 years old when Ninjago first came out, listening to the Weekend Whip, watching the first 2 episodes, absolutely falling in love with the theme, the sets, the spinners, and now 15 years later, I'm 25 and look where we are. I am still building and reviewing Ninjago sets 15 years later. I remember 15 years ago, my very first Ninjago set was the Ice Dragon Shard, and I was so excited to build that. I literally built it at the mall at the food court. I remember exactly where I was sitting when I built that set, and it's so crazy to see Ninjago still going strong 15 years later with this absolutely beautiful set that I once again rushed to the LEGO store, the nearest one I could get to, which was 2.5 hours away by train from where I am right now, to be able to build this in my hotel room and give you a review as soon as I could. And so, that about sums up my thoughts on this absolutely amazing flagship Ninjago set. The value for what you pay is insane. $300 for over 4,000 pieces and all of these exclusive minifigures is just unheard of. There is no other LEGO theme giving you this level of value. So honestly, for even the very minor nitpicks I've had about little things in the set, little things that maybe I felt could have been improved here and there, the rest of the set easily makes up for it, more than makes up for it, and this has cemented itself as the best Ninjago set to come out this year. Maybe one of the best Ninjago sets to come out ever, easily in the top 5, maybe top 3, and it could even be number 1, but I have to sit and think about that a lot more. Obviously, I am feeling the hype right now. I think this set totally does live up to the hype, and ask me in like a month or 2 if I still think this is the best Ninjago set ever, because right now, it sure is feeling like it. That's all I have to say about this review. Hope you enjoyed this look at the Ninjago Old Town. This has been an absolute monstrous journey to obtain this set, a true Ninjago Legends monstrosity of a video, as any review of this should be. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to the amazing LEGO designer Lee, who is a good friend as well, who was able to put this together and really just made this for the fans, and I'm very happy with that. And I hope you enjoyed this look at this incredible Ninjago set. Bye for now.